Good morning, everyone. It's week 6, and I'm going to be reading to you Black Sunday. It is our social studies article of the week. Shocking story of the biggest dust storm in American history by our very own Lauren Tarshis. All right, so let's take a look at what Black Sunday was. 9-year-old Catherine Hathrop was sure the world was coming to an end. It was Sunday, April 14th, 1935. Catherine was enjoying a quiet afternoon at her grandmother's house in Hodgman Country, Kansas. Suddenly, Catherine's grandmother rushed inside. "Oh my," she cried. "There's a terrible black cloud and I have no idea what it is." People saw the same black cloud for hundreds of miles. It was like a boiling mountain churning through the sky. It was like a boiling mountain churning through the sky. Sounds like our reading lesson this week. Sounds like a simile. Was it a violent thunderstorm? Was it a massive tornado? It was the biggest dust storm in U.S. history. 300,000 tons of dry soil had been swept into the sky. It had formed a swirling dust cloud more than 200 miles wide. It was speeding across the land at 65 miles per hour. The storm was destroying everything in its path. What had caused this horrible dust storm? And what would happen to Catherine and her grandmother when it hit? I want you to just stop and think right now. So we've got a historical fictional story here. So we've got some historical elements, which means the setting and the time period is real. This actually really did happen in our history. But is Catherine real, or is this just a story embedded in to help us understand the time period? Okay, so just be thinking about that as I continue reading. Nature in balance. Extreme weather events like tornadoes and hurricanes are natural disasters. But the dust storm of 1935 was caused by another destructive force: humans. How did this happen? Let's go back in time to find out. At one time, Kansas and the areas around it were most empty wilderness. The region is known as the Southern Plains. It includes parts of Kansas, Colorado, Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. The land there is flat and treeless, but it was once covered by millions of acres of tall prairie grass. The prairie grasses were practically indestructible. Some types were 6 feet tall. Their roots reached down 9 feet into the earth. The hardiest grasses could hold up to the pounding hooves of running buffalo. Their roots could survive fires. Most importantly, the grasses could live through severe weather. The Southern Plains had freezing winters, roasting summers, and bone-dry years of drought. The natural world of the Southern Plains was harsh, but nature was in balance for thousands of years. The people who lived there were members of the native nations like the Comanche and the Kiowa. They left the prairie grasses mostly untouched. So I want you to take a look at this picture in the bottom right-hand corner, and I want you to think, why did the author include this picture right here? Because that doesn't look like what was described above. So think about that for a minute. And let's go to the next page. Where the wind blew fire. Weather was extreme on the Southern Plains, but the Native Americans who lived there respected the area's wilderness. One Comanche chief praised it as a place where the wind blew free and there was nothing to break the light of the sun. Ripping up the grass. So just stop here for a minute and think. Like, what's happening? What's going on? Because we have this prairie here, and then we have this picture with this big machine. So I just want you to stop and think and take a moment to, like, what's going on? Okay? Ripping up the grass. But much of the Southern Plains had been transformed by the late 1800s. The U.S. government wanted to fill up the American wilderness with towns and cities and farms. They unfairly forced the Native Americans from their traditional lands. They lured white settlers to the area with free or very cheap land. The new settlers arrived by the thousands. Catherine's grandfather came from Ireland around 1890. He was eager to start farming this promising new land. But before settlers could plant crops, they had to clear the prairie grass. The grasses weren't indestructible after all. Farmers used plows, axes, and their bare hands to rip the grasses from the earth. Within 2 decades, millions of acres of grassland had been turned into wheat farms. A hopeful time. The wheat farms flourished at first. Rain was plentiful. The years between 1910 and 1930 were usually wet. Crops grew quickly. Towns, stores, churches sprouted up. It was during this hopeful time that Catherine was born. Her father grew wheat and raised cattle on a farm about 17 miles from the town of Kinsley, Kansas. Kinsley, Kansas. Catherine was one of 7 children. She was a tomboy who dreaded girl chores like laundry and cooking. She loved riding horses and following her father out into the fields. Catherine and her siblings went to one-room schoolhouse. It was 3 miles away from their farm. Catherine's home was a happy one, but hard times were just ahead. Few people on the plains would be spared. So think about that for a minute. It's happy times for them, but what happened to all those grasslands? Hmm. What happened to the Indians? What happened to the animals? What happened to the land? Like, did it all just get destroyed? So it's happy for these people, but not so happy for all the people that they displaced. Mountains of dust, raging dust storms like the one at the night buried houses under towering piles of dirt, some so high as 20 feet. The dust seeped underneath doors, through cracks in the window frames, ruining everything inside. Dreams turned to dust. It all began in 1930. America faced a crisis that would become known as the Great Depression. Banks around the country ran out of money. Millions of people lost their jobs. The price of wheat fell. Sounds like what's happening now. Farmers on the plains earned far less money for the crops they grew on their farms. Even families like Catherine struggled to pay their bills. But this was just the beginning. So I want y'all to look at this picture over here, because what are they wearing? Mask. That's what we'll be doing. If you go out in public, as of today, you have to wear a mask. Not because of the dust, but because of the virus. But this was just the beginning. The year 1932 brought another crisis, a drought. The rain simply stopped. All through that spring, the sky stayed blue. That summer brought intense heat. Crops shriveled up. Without the protective layer of the prairie grass, soil dried up. It was carried away by the wind. On windy days, the air would be gritty with dust. The sky would turn dirty brown. Catherine's mother would rinse the dust plates before meals. She would lay a cloth across the food until everyone was ready to eat. But the dusty winds were nothing compared to the storms that came next. They brought enormous clouds of dust and dirt. The clouds covered the sun in damp piles of dust big enough to bury animals, kill crops, and fill up basements. A person caught in a storm would choke as dust rushed up their nose. The gritty wind would rake across their skin like millions of tiny claws. As time went on, the storms happened more and more often. Many realized that removing the prairie grass had been a terrible mistake, but nobody could agree on what to do about it. Meanwhile, life got worse and worse on the plains. Catherine's family was lucky. Money was scarce, but there was always food on the table. Many people lost everything. As land turned to dust, so did their dreams. By 1935, tens of thousands of people left their farms. Those who stayed hoped and prayed for better times. So I want you to stop and think right now and write down, how does this story remind you of what's happening now? Like we're closed down everything. Oil has hit an all-time low. People are losing jobs. We're having to wear a mask. Like just stop right now and think about, how does this story compare to what we're experiencing now?